Hello from Valour Canada. We are a Calgary-based nonprofit with the goal of educating Canadians, especially youth, about our country's military history and heritage. This activity is designed to educate about D-Day and fits within our D-Day presentation, link in the description. This activity is for students in grades 9 to 12, and it requires students to think about goals, actions, and consequences in a logical sequence in order to plan their own D-Day coastal assault. The handouts and materials for this activity, also shown in the video, can be found in this video's description. There is not an activity for younger grades. Let's begin. The image you're looking at shows various invasion craft with the Canadian infantry on their way to Juno Beach on D-Day. This photo would have been taken after the first few waves of soldiers attacked and gained control of the beach. We've talked about Operation Overlord and how that is the big overarching plan for D-Day. Basically, they're trying to get soldiers and equipment from England across the English Channel, land them successfully on the coast of France, move them inland, defeating the enemy as they go, and up to and including the landscape surrounding the Seine River. Overlord's going to take weeks, probably multiple months. Now, today in your activity, you're going to be focusing on Operation Neptune, and this is a small piece of Operation Overlord. Operation Neptune is the water portion of Overlord. So that's just the part where you get all your soldiers and equipment from here and somehow get them across the channel and land them in France somewhere. Now, I'm not telling you where this is because this is the activity that you're going to complete. Your group is going to need to figure out how you're going to get your soldiers and vehicles and equipment successfully across the channel and safely landed, well, safely as much as possible. You saw those defenses that we were looking at earlier. To safely land them on the coast in order to prepare them to move inland. Okay, so to simplify, where are you going to land and how are you going to do it? Before you begin, I should explain what you have at your disposal. First off, you've got 300,000 soldiers, and if you recall, Dieppe only used 6,000, so you've got 50 times as many soldiers as were used at Dieppe. You've also got 4,000 aircraft, including all the pilots and crew, and you've got 10,000 ships and boats, including all the necessary sailors and support staff. You've also got a finely tuned industry that can create almost anything you need for your armed forces. Now, each group is going to get three things. One of these is a map that looks like this. Okay, each group is going to get a map that looks like this. Now, I want to point out a few things on here. So this map shows the German formations in the west on D-Day. And if you look here at the key, you can see that these rectangles are German divisions. Okay, the first two are Panzer divisions, the one with the diagonal cross and the vertical cross. Panzers are going to be more mobile, so they can not only do a lot of damage fighting, but they can move quickly across the landscape. These other shades or clear rectangles, these are infantry divisions. Also, these yellow areas that you'll notice along the coast, they are beaches. Okay, so there's a beach here, yellow, 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 yellow. All these are beaches. And the green, so these are out in the English Channel, these squiggly lines, this is water. Okay, this is the English Channel. And these green circles or rectangles are naval minefields. Now, just to be clear, that doesn't mean that they are a firm barrier. You can take boats through them, but it's very dangerous. Okay, so keep that in mind. You can take boats through there, but they're very dangerous. Now, when you and your group are working together on the questions and making your plan, I want you to keep some things in mind. Now, first off, I want you to be mindful of the German defenses. Now, we looked at them pretty closely in the previous presentation, but just keep them in mind. What are their positions on land? Do they have control of airspace? What about the English Channel? where are their reinforcements, and are they able to move them into the beach that you're going to attack? And hence the infrastructure. So this is roads and railways. Okay. Secondly, your own soldiers and materials. What do you have? What are your strengths and weaknesses, and what are their range? Okay. Now, we're not going to get into the thick detail of airplane models such and such and how far they can fly before they need to turn around and refuel. We're not going to get into that detail, but I just want you to be thinking of these things. Next, weather and sea tides. Remember, you've got to do your assault at low tide so that you can see those beach defenses, those obstacles. Weather's another one. You want to attack at a time of good weather. You got to remember, these are army guys, infantry guys that are used to being on land, and if you're putting them on boats and taking them across the English Channel when it's really rough seas, they're going to get off the boat onto the beach, and they're going to be like sick to their stomach. They're not going to be in good fighting condition. So you need to do your attack at a time of good weather. Aspect. So this refers to where is the sun's positioning when you do your attack. And I ask you, which part of the sky does the sun rise in? It rises in the east, correct. So the next question is, if you attack towards the east, who has the advantage, you or your enemy? Well, the answer is your enemy, because the sun's going to be behind them, which means that you are going to be looking directly into the sun, and it's going to give the enemy a huge advantage. So be mindful of that when you're choosing the time of day of your attack. And again, like at noon or 1 o'clock in the early afternoon, the sun's going to be high in the sky, so it's not really going to be an advantage for anyone. Next is the moon phase. Now, if you want to do any night operations, you might want a little bit of moonlight so that your soldiers can see a little better. But if your soldiers can see a little better, so can the enemy. All right. And then lastly, counterintelligence. Can you trick or deceive the enemy into thinking that you're going to do something that you're not going to do? So can you fake them out on something? Now, these are only some of the things that the D-Day planners needed to account for when they were working this out. Now, don't worry about remembering all these, because the second thing that each group is going to get is a cheat sheet that looks like this. Okay, so you're going to get a map that I showed you on the previous slide, and you're going to get this. And read through this at least once. Keep these things in mind. It's basically an outline of what I've already covered in the presentations. So now the third piece is the worksheet. Okay, so each group's going to get a map, a cheat sheet, and a worksheet. Okay, the worksheet, read through it carefully, do the questions starting with 1 and then continue on to 2, 3, 4, and 5. Don't skip ahead to 4 and 5. Make sure that you do 1, 2, and 3 first. Those questions are designed to help you be more successful for question 4 and 5 when you're actually formulating your plan. And make sure to record your reasoning and your logic on the worksheet, and be prepared to explain your group's answers and reasoning to everybody. So once again, read the question sheet thoroughly. Don't skip ahead. Make sure you start with question 1, then do question 2, and so on. And this question sheet looks like this. It's double-sided. Again, there's a bit of information here, a couple hints for you. Read through this, and then, like I said, do the questions in order. So where will you land? Okay, I'm going to quickly whip through the map again. Don't forget 1, 2, 3, 4, all these red numbers all the way to 10. These rectangles are German divisions. The yellow, beaches. The green, minefields. Keep all those things in mind. And just to be absolutely clear, the point of this exercise is not to get the correct historical answer. The goal is instead for you and your group mates to use logic and reason to create a plan that makes sense. Don't stress over the details. What I'm looking for is something along the lines of, if we do this, then the likelihood of our success is higher because of that, okay, and so on. Now, this and that are up to you to decide. I didn't want to give away any more answers because I've already given you a bunch of hints. So once we begin, you guys can go for it, and then once we get 5 or 10 minutes or so, we'll begin taking up the answers. Okay, you've had some time to answer the questions on the worksheet, so let's begin by discussing answers. So question number 1, why were the soldiers, the equipment, etc., spread throughout England? Any ideas? How about these? So first off, you want to reduce the potential for a major loss if the enemy bombs you. Obviously, if you have everything in one location, you're a singular target, and that's very attractive to your enemy. On the offensive side of things, you want to reduce the potential that the enemy thinks you're going to make a major move, like an attack or an invasion. Okay, if your forces are spread out, then they can't conclude that you're going to attack in an area where you have all of your materials and soldiers. Question number 2, should you use all of your resources or keep some in reserve? Well, if you recall back a few slides, I said that you had 300,000 soldiers, and then on I think it was the next slide, I had that 140,000 were sent. So that gives you an idea of how many the Allies actually sent as compared to what they had at their disposal. So the answer to number 2 is it's almost always a good idea to have some in reserve. Okay, why is that? Well, unpredictable things happen. And also, if you use everything you have and the enemy has more than you think and they attack you, you have nothing left to defend yourself against. Another possible reason would be, what if you use 100% for your attack and you get bogged down and you need just a little bit more and you don't have any? That's a big problem too. So generally speaking, you should keep some in reserve at all times. Question number 3, how will the soldiers and equipment get across the beach? What sort of difficulties will they face? We talked about this in the other presentation, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. We all know that the soldiers are going to be on foot. Very few of them are going to be in tanks. And once the soldiers and tanks get control of that beach, then it's going to be much safer for the arriving soldiers. But until that happens, it's a very, very nasty place to be. They're going to be facing heavy fire with almost zero cover, and then you'll recall the obstacles and the mines and the explosives. Question number 4, your invasion. What time of day are you going to do it, and why? The real D-Day, and in fact most of the big battles throughout military history worldwide and through history, these attacks happen first thing in the morning, and the reason is that you can move into position under the cover of darkness. Then as soon as the sun rises, that's when you do your attack. There is something to be said for maybe you'll catch the enemy having a lazy morning where they were still asleep. But it's not even close to being the big reason. The big reason is that you move into position under the cover of darkness. And that's what happened on D-Day. They moved across the English Channel at night, and right when they were coming into view of the coast was the exact same time that the sun was rising. Question number 5, the pièce de résistance. Where was the location of your attack? And for those of you who are observant, you already see the answer in the top right-hand corner, number 4. And number 4 on the map is surrounded by the yellow square. Okay, now a few things to point out here on the map. You'll notice that 9 and 10 are off the map. Well, I couldn't fit the whole map on the screen. 9 and 10 were definitely out of range of the aircraft that the Allies were using. Now, as I said earlier, we're not getting into that level of detail, but you should be aware of that they were out of range. We'll notice that there's the beach here. And as I mentioned, you need to attack a beach. You can't attack a cliff because it's just going to be a waste of effort because you can't get up the cliff. It wasn't up here where it was so close. And you can see that there was a pretty big naval minefield that they had to move through. So we'll talk a little bit more about details here in a minute. But the answer, this historical answer, is number 4. Now, I'm not saying that if the Allies had attacked some of the other locations that they wouldn't have been successful. It's possible that they would have. So if you chose another location and your reasoning and your logic was sound, then that is an acceptable answer. Why assault the beaches in Normandy? Well, there were a bunch of reasons why location 4, the Bay of Normandy, was chosen. Now, first off, it was not an obvious location to the enemy. Now, interestingly enough about this point, Hitler always thought the Allies were going to attack the French coast in the Bay of Normandy. The majority of his generals thought that it was going to happen in Calais, which was the closest point between England and the European coast. Okay, it's the narrowest part of the English Channel. Another reason that the Allies chose the Bay of Normandy is because the beaches there have a low topography and the sand was dense enough to hold the vehicles and the tanks so that they wouldn't sink in and get stuck. Sometimes students ask, well, how did they know that was the case? Well, the Navy sent in some frogmen to do tests on the sand prior to the invasion. By prior, I mean months before, because they didn't want to develop this plan if they found out only a few weeks before that the sand wasn't good enough. Another reason they chose the Bay of Normandy is because there were many options for expansion after landing, and it was a big enough area to land a bunch of soldiers and equipment at once, and this would give them multiple locations to threaten the enemy. It makes sense if you look at it here. So we've got the Bay of Normandy, this area here. You've got 2 big ports, Cherbourg and Le Havre. So the idea was that Cherbourg's here and Le Havre's here. The idea was the Allies could land on the beaches. The guys over here could go inland, isolate the enemy here, take them out, take this port. The guys in the middle could move inland, take the enemy out. And the guys on this side could come in and eventually work their way over and isolate this port and take control of it as well. Okay, so it was a big area with a lot of different strategic options for the Allies. Next, it was in a bay, so this would mean that there would be more shelter from any winds out in the English Channel, and this matters for the infantry army soldiers that aren't used to being on boats. And also it would help the boats stay on course, because if you recall, there's that big minefield that's just north of the bay. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. The Bay of Normandy was also within range of the fighter planes, and in contrast with 1, 2, and 3, it's a little closer to the west. So if the U.S., if there's success in Normandy, then the U.S. Can resupply it more easily than if it was, especially 1 and 2, where it'd be easier to target by the enemy any incoming boat convoys. Now we're zoomed in, looking at the one of the beaches in Normandy. This is the Canadian beach, so Juno Beach, and you'll notice here that these beaches are named. Okay, so we've got over here, we've got Mike Green and Mike Red Beach, and then over here we've got Nan Green, Nan White, and Nan Red. And this was a way to divide up the beach so that each military unit could stay within their narrow area of the part of the beach that they were responsible for. So well done, everybody. That's a pretty difficult activity. It takes a lot of forethought and logical planning, and you've made it. So good job. This concludes the activity portion of the DDay presentation. To see the final few slides of the DDay presentation, you'll have to go back to the main video.